I found proof of my own erasure, hidden in a dusty wooden box tucked behind old Christmas decorations in my mother's attic. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. It looked like every other box in a lifetime of cluttered memories. But when I opened it, the air felt different, heavy, stale, almost deliberate, as if time itself had been sealed inside to hide something it didn't want me to see. Inside were photo albums, the kind wrapped in plastic, corners yellowing with age. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the first one, expecting to see birthdays, graduations, Sunday picnics, pieces of the life I thought I had lived. But page after page, something was missing. Someone was missing. Me. My brother's first steps, my sister's birthday cakes, my parents smiling in front of houses I helped them move into. They were all there. Yet every photo that should have had me was cropped, cut, or conveniently angled away. The family's smiles looked brighter in my absence, almost as if removing me made the picture more complete. I flipped faster, my fingers shaking. There was the family trip to the lake where I'd fallen off the dock. I remembered the bruise, the laughter that followed. But in the album, the dock was empty, the water still, my space erased like I had never been there. One by one, I opened the rest. Weddings, reunions, anniversaries. All telling a story I didn't recognize. It wasn't my family's history. It was their version of it, one carefully edited to make me invisible. Each missing image was a silent confession, a reminder that my absence wasn't an accident. I ran my hand across the empty plastic pockets where photos should have been, where my childhood might have lived if it had been allowed. The imprints were still there, faint outlines of pictures removed long ago, proof that I had existed once, before someone decided I shouldn't. Dust gathered on my palms as I turned another page and found a note stuck between the sheets. My mother's handwriting, neat and familiar. It said, "Only keep the good ones." For the first time, I understood what good meant to her. It meant obedient, silent, invisible. The attic creaked as I sat there, surrounded by ghosts of moments I was never meant to remember. My chest ached, not just from what I saw, but from what I finally knew, that this wasn't forgetfulness. It was rewriting. It was a history scrubbed clean of the child who never fit the image. The box wasn't just filled with photos, it was filled with years of denial. The proof of my own erasure lay before me. Tangible, undeniable, cruelly meticulous. And with every missing picture, I felt the weight of what I had ignored for so long, pressing against my ribs, forcing me to see the truth I had spent years refusing to face. I sat there, the morning light spilling through the attic window, illuminating everything they tried to hide. My mother didn't forget me. She removed me. That realization didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like a shadow I'd been pretending wasn't there. I used to believe her excuses. Oh, that picture must have gotten misplaced. Or, I didn't have a good one of you from that day. I wanted to believe it was carelessness, not cruelty. But standing there with the album spread out before me, it became clear. None of it was an accident. Every photo that once held my face had been carefully replaced. Frames that used to hang in the hallway, the ones I dusted every Saturday growing up, now displayed only my siblings, my parents, even cousins I barely knew. My space in those memories had been overwritten, as though I'd never belonged there to begin with. The newsletters my mother sent to relatives every Christmas were stacked neatly in a drawer. I flipped through them year by year, watching my existence fade. In the early ones, my name appeared briefly. Ocean won the school essay contest. Then less often, Ocean is busy with work. Until finally, nothing. Just my siblings, their successes, their perfect smiling photos, their carefully curated lives. My mother's handwriting was flawless, her tone warm and proud, but never for me. She described family vacations I wasn't invited to, dinners I never attended, milestones I didn't even know had happened. Reading them felt like watching a life I could have lived but wasn't allowed to. Every replaced frame told its own quiet story. There was one I remembered vividly, the photo from my 16th birthday, where I stood in a blue dress beside the cake I'd baked myself. It used to hang above the mantel. Now in its place was a picture of my sister graduating. The hook hadn't even been moved, only I had. I found a folder labeled Family Memories, Updated. Inside were digital copies, the modern version of her revision. Photoshopped smiles, cropped corners, carefully curated happiness. My absence was smooth, clean, almost professional. You wouldn't even notice someone, was missing unless you knew where to look. As I stared at those images, it hit me how deliberate it all was. Forgetting happens by accident. This was precision, effort, a quiet form of cruelty dressed as perfection. She didn't erase me to forget. She erased me to control the story. Every decision she made screamed of intention. Who to include, what to display, what to hide. Even the storage boxes had labels written in her neat handwriting. Family photos, vacations, holidays. But none said my name. Not one. It wasn't just photos. Old emails revealed group conversations I was never part of. Family chat, the subject lines read. Messages about gatherings, celebrations, announcements, sent to everyone but me. The silence wasn't accidental. It was engineered. And that's when it sank in. My mother didn't just erase me from pictures. She erased me from belonging. Every missing photo, every edited newsletter, every replaced frame was a choice. A deliberate act of rewriting our family's story so it could look perfect without the daughter who didn't fit. Silence was my assigned role. It wasn't something they said out loud. It was something I learned between sighs, glances, and the long, empty pauses that followed whenever I tried to speak. Every time I voiced a feeling, the room would go still. My mother's jaw would tighten, and my father's eyes would drift toward the television as if my words were static. That's how I learned that peace in our house meant quiet. My quiet. I became fluent in swallowing words. Apologies rolled off my tongue before I even knew what I was sorry for. My opinions came out in whispers, softened until they no longer sounded like me. The walls of our home didn't echo with arguments. They echoed with the sound of compliance, the practiced rhythm of a daughter who had learned not to upset the balance. When my sister cried, the world stopped. When I cried, it was not the right time. My pain was always inconvenient, always a disruption. So I folded it into myself, layered it between chores and smiles, and called it love. That's what they told me it was. You're being respectful. You're the mature one. I mistook silence for strength because they trained me to. Dinner conversations were one-sided performances. My family's laughter filled the table, and I learned to laugh on cue. When I disagreed, I learned to hide it behind a nod, a polite smile, or a sip of water. The silence became a habit, one that clung to me even outside that house. In friendships, relationships, even in rooms where I had every right to speak, I thought keeping the peace meant being loved. I truly did. I believed that if I stayed agreeable, calm, and quiet, they would finally see me as good, as enough. But the truth was, the more I complied, the less visible I became. My silence didn't earn me love. It erased me from it. Every compliment I received was for my restraint. You're so understanding. You never argue. You're not like your sister. You're patient. But those words weren't praise. They were chains. They weren't admiring my calm. They were rewarding my obedience. I see that now. Even in moments of injustice, I bit my tongue. When they blamed me for things I didn't do, I stayed quiet to keep the peace. When they overlooked me, I told myself it didn't matter. When they rewrote stories where I was the villain or the fool, I let them, because arguing meant losing the illusion of harmony. There were nights when I'd sit in my room, rehearsing the things I wished I could say, full monologues of anger, truth, and longing. But by morning, those words turned to dust in my throat. The fear of being labeled ungrateful was stronger than the need to be heard. Looking back, I see how silence became my disguise, a way to survive in a family that only valued perfection. I was the proof of their control, the daughter who didn't cause trouble, the one they could point to and say, "See, she's fine." I wasn't fine. I was invisible. Now I understand what that silence really was. Not peace, not love, but control. Every quiet moment, every forced smile, very time I swallowed my truth to protect their comfort. It wasn't devotion. It was the cost of belonging to a family that only loved the version of me that didn't speak. The evidence of betrayal was clinical. There was no emotion in the way it was written, no hesitation in the ink. Just dates, amounts, and brief remarks. Each one a record of choices that reshaped my life without my consent. My mother's handwriting was precise, elegant even, as if betrayal were a task on her to-do list, something to be filed neatly between grocery runs and charity meetings. The first document I found was a financial ledger tucked into a folder labeled Education. My name appeared once, next to a crossed-out line, Art Scholarship Fund Reallocated. Sophia's MBA support. The simplicity of the note made my stomach twist. There it was, the future I had dreamed of, turned into someone else's stepping stone. No guilt, no justification, just a line of ink that erased years of effort. Every page was worse than the last. Notes about presentation priorities, where my achievements were deliberately omitted from family updates. Budget records where funds meant for my college were marked, better invested elsewhere. She had written it all down, as if she wanted to ensure there was a record. Proof of how carefully she had managed to make me disappear. There were letters, too, sent to relatives, teachers, even family friends. Each one crafted with the same calm authority, planting subtle seeds of doubt about me. "Annie's been struggling to stay focused lately," one letter read. Another described me as emotionally unpredictable and still finding her way. Those words explained so much. Why opportunities slipped away, why people's smiles grew thin when they spoke to me. The precision of it all was what hurt most. This wasn't impulsive cruelty. It was methodical. My mother didn't act out of anger or disappointment. She planned it, documented it, and executed it like a project. Each note, each adjustment, was another careful incision, cutting away pieces of my identity until there was nothing left to recognize. Among the files, I found one labeled Household Contributions. At first, it looked harmless. Lists of chores, event notes, family schedules. But tucked between them was a section titled Delegations. Under Sophia's name, Media Outreach, Public Image, Social Correspondence. Under mine, Childcare, Support, Errands. The hierarchy was unmistakable. Even at home, my role had been assigned, controlled, and reduced to service. In another folder, I discovered copies of emails. Some were correspondence with my sisters. Others were with people I had once trusted. Mentors, teachers, even friends. "Please disregard Annie's application," one message read, sent to the art school that had once offered me an interview. "She's not in the right emotional space to commit." My mother's signature sat below it, her tone polite, her words deadly. I could almost see her sitting at her desk, glasses perched on her nose, writing these notes as if they were simple administrative duties. She must have believed this was all justified, that she was maintaining order, protecting the family's image, keeping things on track. But what she was really doing was constructing a cage and calling it care. As I turned each page, a pattern emerged. Every decision she made, every adjustment she recorded, had one purpose: to ensure I remained small, dependent, and forgettable. My achievements were redirected, my successes merged with others, my name quietly removed from anything that might have given me visibility. It was the architecture of erasure, cleat. Anne, efficient, untraceable. By the time I reached the last page, my hands were trembling. Not from shock, that had already passed, but from recognition. The truth was written right there in her handwriting. Not love, not protection, but control disguised as care. Each note was proof that my invisibility hadn't been accidental. It was designed, line by line, in the steady script of a woman who believed she had the right to decide which of her children deserved to exist. My sister wasn't a victim. She was an accomplice. It took me years to see it, to stop mistaking her soft apologies and teary eyes for innocence. But the truth was etched in every whisper, every carefully timed silence. She didn't just stand by while it happened. She helped compose the rhythm of my disappearance. Her hands weren't clean. They were dipped in the same quiet cruelty my mother perfected. When I looked back, the signs were everywhere. The way she'd redirect conversations when I spoke, how she'd accidentally forget to include me in group messages or family photos. The subtle pauses, the nervous laughter, the way she'd look away when I asked questions. At the time, I thought it was guilt. Now I understand. It was strategy. She was ensuring the performance stayed seamless, that the illusion of unity never cracked. She learned early that alignment with my mother meant reward. When she followed orders, she got praise, gifts, attention. Things I once thought were random acts of affection. But they weren't random. They were payment. Each compliment was a transaction. Each hug a receipt of loyalty. My mother didn't just manipulate her. She molded her into an ally. My sister became both puppet and performer, executing my erasure with a smile that looked like love. The precision of it all was what hurt most. This wasn't impulsive cruelty. It was methodical. My mother didn't act out of anger or disappointment. She planned it, documented it, and executed it like a project. Each note, each adjustment, was another careful incision, cutting away pieces of my identity until there was nothing left to recognize. Among the files, I found one labeled Household Contributions. At first, it looked harmless. Lists of chores, event notes, family schedules. But tucked between them was a section titled Delegations. Under Sophia's name, Media Outreach, Public Image, Social Correspondence. Under mine, Childcare, Support, Errands. The hierarchy was unmistakable. Even at home, my role had been assigned, controlled, and reduced to service. In another folder, I discovered copies of emails. Some were correspondence with my sisters. Others were with people I had once trusted. Mentors, teachers, even friends. Please disregard Annie's application, one message read, sent to the art school that had once offered me an interview. She's not in the right emotional space to commit. My mother's signature sat below it, her tone polite, her words deadly. I could almost see her sitting at her desk, glasses perched on her nose, writing these notes as if they were simple administrative duties. She must have believed this was all justified, that she was maintaining order, protecting the family's image, keeping things on track. But what she was really doing was constructing a cage and calling it care. As I turned each page, a pattern emerged. Every decision she made, every adjustment she recorded, had one purpose: to ensure I remained small, dependent, and forgettable. My achievements were redirected, my successes merged with others, my name quietly removed from anything that might have given me visibility. It was the architecture of erasure. Cleat. Anne, efficient, untraceable. By the time I reached the last page, my hands were trembling. Not from shock, that had already passed, but from recognition. The truth was written right there in her handwriting. Not love, not protection, but control disguised as care. Each note was proof that my invisibility hadn't been accidental. It was designed, line by line, in the steady script of a woman who believed she had the right to decide which of her children deserved to exist. My sister wasn't a victim. She was an accomplice. It took me years to see it, to stop mistaking her soft apologies and teary eyes for innocence. But the truth was etched in every whisper, every carefully timed silence. She didn't just stand by while it happened. She helped compose the rhythm of my disappearance. Her hands weren't clean. They were dipped in the same quiet cruelty my mother perfected. When I looked back, the signs were everywhere. The way she'd redirect conversations when I spoke, how she'd accidentally forget to include me in group messages or family photos. The subtle pauses, the nervous laughter, the way she'd look away when I asked questions. At the time, I thought it was guilt. Now I understand. It was strategy. She was ensuring the performance stayed seamless, that the illusion of unity never cracked. She learned early that alignment with my mother meant reward. When she followed orders, she got praise, gifts, attention. Things I once thought were random acts of affection. But they weren't random. They were payment. Each compliment was a transaction. Each hug a receipt of loyalty. My mother didn't just manipulate her. She molded her into an ally. My sister became both puppet and performer, executing my erasure with a smile that looked like love. The most painful part wasn't her betrayal. It was her comfort. She played her role effortlessly, rehearsed in the art of pretending to protect me while feeding the very system that crushed me. I tried to talk to Mom. She'd whisper late at night, eyes wide with false sincerity. But the next morning, she'd be the first to repeat my words, twisted into something unrecognizable. She didn't defend me. She delivered me. I remember one family gathering vividly, a birthday party for our cousin. My mother made a cutting remark about my dramatic tendencies, and my sister laughed just loud enough to confirm it. That laugh echoed for years. It wasn't just a sound, it was approval, a signal that she was on the right side of the room. I learned then that silence could wound, but laughter could kill. When I started pulling away, she played the savior. She'd check in occasionally, asking if I was okay, pretending to bridge the gap she helped create. Her texts were always perfectly timed, right after an argument, right before a family event. "You know Mom means well," she'd say, softening her tone, restoring the balance that kept me trapped. She was the mediator, the one who made sure I never strayed too far from their control. Even her apologies were rehearsed. They came in cycles, small doses of regret to keep me hopeful, to keep me coming back. "I didn't know she'd go that far," she once said, eyes glistening with the kind of pain that looked genuine. But the emails I later found told another story. She had known everything. She'd signed her name on the very documents that reallocated my funds, replaced my recognition, and justified my exclusion. She thrived in the role of the good daughter. While I was labeled the difficult one, she became the compliant, the reliable, the shining example. Our mother needed contrast, one child to showcase, one to scapegoat. And my sister played her part to perfection. Her goodness depended on my supposed failure. Without me, she had no mirror to reflect her virtue. I was the necessary shadow that made her light believable. The worst realization came not from her words, but from her tone. When she spoke about me, even in front of others, there was a kind of detachment, as if I were an idea, not a person. "Annie's always been sensitive," she'd say, half smiling, as though explaining away a flaw in a product. She didn't have to lie outright. Her tone did the work for her. It made me sound fragile, unreliable, conveniently unimportant. In the end, their dynamic was seamless, a duet disguised as dysfunction. My mother wrote the melody, and my sister carried the harmony. Together they composed a song of absence, performed flawlessly over the years. Every word, every gesture, every omission was intentional, and I was the silence between their notes, the proof of how well they played together. Grandma Rose was my quiet rebellion. While my mother sculpted control into conversation and my sister mirrored her cruelty with a smile, Grandma Rose simply watched, eyes steady, knowing more than she ever said. She was the only one who didn't need to be convinced of my worth, the only one who didn't ask me to shrink to fit someone else's comfort. In her small, trembling hands, she carried the kind of power that didn't need to shout. Her house smelled of lavender and wood polish, a place untouched by the chaos that ruled everywhere else. When I visited, she'd pour tea into porcelain cups so thin the light passed through them, and without saying a word, she'd let me exhale. It wasn't just the tea. It was the stillness, the quiet rebellion of peace. She didn't fight my mother directly. She fought by preserving the pieces of me they tried to erase. In drawers tucked behind old linens and family photos, Grandma Rose kept evidence. Report cards, art projects, handwritten notes. The things my mother threw away, she retrieved and saved. She told me once, with a small smirk, truth doesn't vanish just because someone hides it. At the time, I didn't understand. Years later, I realized she had been archiving my existence, quietly, methodically, without ever asking for thanks. She became my refuge when home turned into a battlefield. After every argument, I'd end up at her doorstep, shivering with anger or exhaustion, and she'd open the door without question. "You hungry?" she'd ask, as though that simple question could heal anything. And somehow, it often did. She understood that love wasn't always grand gestures. Sometimes, it was soup on a quiet afternoon, and the permission to exist without judgment. What set her apart was how she refused to take sides, at least not openly. She played the part of the fragile old woman who didn't understand the family drama. But she understood everything. Her neutrality was her disguise, her shield against my mother's suspicion. In reality, she was orchestrating small acts of rebellion, protecting me from a distance while pretending not to notice what was happening. When I once confronted my mother about a missing scholarship letter, Grandma Rose said nothing. But a week later, she slipped the letter into my hand during a visit, folded neatly inside a cookbook. "Don't let them tell your story," she whispered, her voice a mix of warning and love. That letter became more than a piece of paper. It was proof that someone believed me when everyone else tried to silence me. She kept photos too, the unedited ones, pictures of birthdays, school plays, and moments my mother claimed were too messy for display. They were tucked into an old album labeled The Lost Years. Every image was lies, key a heartbeat, reminding me I had existed, that I had been seen. When I flipped through those pages years later, I cried not because of the memories, but because someone had cared enough to preserve them. Even her phone calls were coded messages of support. When she said, "I made your favorite pie," it meant, "I know they hurt you today." When she said, "Stop by when you can," it meant, "You're not alone." She never interfered directly. She didn't need to. Her love worked like gravity, unseen but undeniable, holding me steady when everything else tried to pull me apart. I learned strength from her subtlety. She taught me that rebellion doesn't always look like shouting or breaking away. Sometimes it's endurance. Sometimes it's a hand that saves what others discard. A quiet smile that says, "I see you," when no one else does. Her power wasn't loud. It was patient, deliberate, unshakable. She didn't rescue me. She reminded me I was worth rescuing. Every boundary I built later in life had her fingerprints on it. Every decision to walk away from pain carried her calm certainty. Grandma Rose was never the heroine of anyone's story but mine, and maybe that was her greatest rebellion, loving me without condition in a family that measured affection and usefulness. In her quiet defiance, I found the blueprint for freedom. The confrontation changed the air in the room. It wasn't loud. It was surgical. My words didn't come out as anger or apology this time, just truth stripped of fear, the kind of truth that doesn't need volume to make an impact. My mother's hands froze mid-gesture. My sister's smirk flickered, and the space between us became something new. Charged, fragile, irreversible. I could hear the clock ticking in the background, that hollow rhythm marking the seconds between who I had been and who I was becoming. Every past version of me, the one who swallowed guilt, who explained herself into exhaustion, stood quietly behind me, watching this moment unfold. I wasn't shaking, though my voice trembled at first. It wasn't weakness, it was release. My mother tried to fill the silence with her usual tone, that careful mix of authority and pity. but it didn't work this time. Her words fell flat, like a spell that had lost its power. I realized then that their control had never been magic. It had always been my obedience. The weight of that realization settled over me like sunlight breaking through dust. Jessica's eyes darted between us, waiting for me to break first. It had always been that way. Her chaos, my cleanup, her mistakes, my punishment. But this time, I didn't reach for the broom. I didn't try to fix it. I simply let the mess sit where it belonged, visible for everyone to see. The discomfort was theirs to hold, not mine. When I said no, it wasn't just a refusal. It was a declaration. 2 letters carrying the weight of every swallowed yes I'd ever spoken. My mother blinked, as though the word itself was blasphemy, something I wasn't supposed to be capable of saying. Her jaw tightened, her breath sharp. For once, she couldn't summon an immediate response. Power had changed hands, and she knew it. The room itself seemed smaller, as if it couldn't contain the shift that had just occurred. My mother's voice, usually steady and commanding, cracked when she finally spoke. She called me ungrateful, selfish, dramatic, the usual weapons, but they no longer pierced. The words hit the floor like dull stones. I had built armor from every wound they'd ever given me, and now it held strong. The silence that followed was heavy, but not suffocating. It was mine. It was the sound of boundaries forming, of an old system collapsing. I stood in it and let it stretch, let it fill every corner of that house where my voice had once been unwelcome. For the first time, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom. Their eyes avoided mine, as though looking directly at me might make them face what they'd done. My mother's posture faltered. Jessica's hands twisted nervously in her lap. They were no longer the unshakable figures of authority I'd once feared, just people, flawed and small, exposed under the light of their own lies. I didn't raise my voice, didn't beg to be understood. I didn't need to. The truth had already done the work. My calm became its own kind of rebellion, a mirror held up to their chaos. Every second that passed made it clearer. I wasn't part of their script anymore. I had rewritten my role in real time, and there was no going back. When I finally stepped back, the silence still lingered, sharp and electric. My mother's face was unreadable, my sister's pale with disbelief. The air itself felt different, lighter, yet irreversible. I had finally learned that the loudest kind of power isn't in what you say. It's in what you refuse to allow anymore. I turned their cruelty into art. It began with trembling hands and a blank canvas, the smell of turpentine sharp in the air. At first, I didn't know what I was painting, just chaos spilling from my chest, colors clashing like arguments replayed in my head. But as the brush began to move with rhythm, something inside me started to shift. The pain stopped being something that crushed me. It became something I could shape. The reds came first. Anger, raw and unfiltered. They splattered across the surface like all the words I'd been too afraid to say. Then came the blues, deep and heavy. For every night I spent trying to understand why love had to hurt. The yellows appeared last, hesitant but determined, sneaking into corners where light had been missing for years. My art became the language of everything I'd buried. Each canvas felt like a confession. I painted the silent dinners, the disappointed stares, the phone calls that ended in blame. I painted the invisible chains that tied me to their expectations. But somewhere between the strokes, I began painting myself differently. Not as the victim trapped inside their cruelty, but as the survivor who had learned to translate pain into creation. When I showed my first piece to a local gallery, I half expected laughter. Instead, there was silence, not the kind I'd grown up fearing, but one of awe. People didn't see brokenness in my work. They saw strength. They saw transformation. It was the first time my story wasn't dismissed or twisted. It was witnessed. The more I painted, the more I understood that every color carried a part of me that they couldn't erase. The bruised purples, the stormy grays, the quiet whites. Each shade was a reminder that I was rebuilding myself from fragments they tried to discard. My art became my autobiography, written in texture instead of ink. Sometimes I stayed up until dawn, my hands stiffened, my heart lighter than it had been in years. The process was messy, unpredictable, just like healing. The more I painted, the less I needed to explain myself. Every brushstroke said what words never could. It was my way of saying, I survived, without needing their validation. When people began buying my pieces, it wasn't about the money. It was about being seen. Strangers could look at my pain and find beauty in it, something my own family never managed to do. My trauma was no longer my prison. It was my signature. Each piece that left my hands carried a fragment of my freedom with it. They heard about my success through whispers, my mother's disbelieving voice on the phone, my sister's forced congratulations. I didn't paint for revenge, but I knew they saw the irony. The very cruelty they used to crush me had become the foundation of my art, my identity, my independence. Their rejection had become my masterpiece. Every exhibition felt like rewriting history. I stood in rooms filled with my work, surrounded by people who saw value in what my family had discarded. The girl who was once invisible now had her name printed beneath framed pieces of truth. Each time I signed my name, I felt a small kind of victory, not against them, but for myself. The studio became my sanctuary. The hum of the fan, the soft crackle of old vinyl, the rhythm of brush on canvas. It was there I learned that creation is the purest kind of defiance. In every portrait, every streak of color, I was reclaiming what they'd stolen. My narrative, my dignity, my light. I painted my pain until it no longer hurt, until it looked like power. They tried to bury me in shadows. I built my gallery out of them. The idea came one sleepless night, surrounded by canvases that stared back at me like ghosts. Every painting carried a secret, every color a confession. I realized then that I wasn't just painting emotions. I was documenting evidence, the kind my family had spent a lifetime trying to erase. The thought of putting it all on display terrified me, but fear was something I'd already outgrown. The gallery wasn't grand. It was an abandoned warehouse at the edge of the city. Cracked walls, leaking pipes, and enough space for truth to echo. I scrubbed the floors myself, hung each canvas by hand, and wrote small notes beneath them. Not names, but words like control, silence, replacement. My story didn't need titles. It needed honesty. Each piece was a mirror turned outward, forcing people to see what I had lived through. When the doors opened on the first night, the air felt electric. Strangers stepped inside, unsure of what they were walking into. Then the silence hit them, the kind that speaks louder than noise. Faces leaned closer to the paintings, trying to decode the emotion buried in the brushstrokes. Some cried, some looked away. And in that moment, I knew I had turned their darkness into light. News spread faster than I expected. The exhibition became a conversation about abuse, control, and the quiet erasure that happens inside perfect-looking families. Critics called it hauntingly intimate. I called it justice. Because for the first time, people saw the masks my family had worn for years. Masks polished with reputation, wealth, and lies, beginning to crack under the weight of my truth. My mother showed up 3 days later. She walked through the gallery in silence, her heels echoing against the floor. When she stopped in front of the painting that mirrored her face, a blur of color distorted by streaks of white, she froze. Her lips trembled, not with apology, but anger. I didn't look away. For years, she had trained me to bow under her gaze. Now, she was the one shrinking under mine. My sister refused to come, but her friends did. They whispered, recognizing details only insiders would know. The handwriting on a fake birthday card, the specific shade of lipstick used in a painting titled "The Smile That Lied." Every secret they kept began to surface, not through confrontation, but through art. I didn't need to raise my voice. The gallery spoke for me. The press wanted interviews, features, sound bites. They wanted to know who the family behind the story was. I never gave names. I didn't need to. The truth was already doing its work. The people who needed to recognize themselves did. Their social masks began to crumble in whispers and rumors, and for once, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. Each night after closing, I walked through the space alone, tracing the outlines of my work with my fingertips. The shadows that once suffocated me now danced softly on the walls, reshaped by the glow of gallery lights. This was what survival looked like. Not vengeance, not noise, but quiet triumph. Every shadow had become part of the art. When journalists described the show as a mirror for the hidden wounds of family betrayal, I realized how universal my story was. People came up to me with tears in their eyes, saying, "That's my mother," or "That's my brother." My pain had stopped belonging to me. It had become something larger, something healing for others too. I didn't just expose their masks. I dismantled the illusion they built around me. The gallery was my declaration that even the darkest stories can become light when told without fear. Every shadow they threw at me became a frame. Every silence became a statement. And every lie they told became part of a truth they could no longer hide. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was reclamation. I learned that the most powerful thing I could ever do wasn't to fight them, but to stop shielding them. For years, I had been their cover, their excuse, their perfect distraction from the truth. Every time I forgave too quickly, every time I stayed silent to keep the peace, I was protecting the very system that erased me. When I finally stopped, everything they built on lies began to shake on its own. The shift was quiet at first. Invitations stopped coming, whispers grew louder, and relatives began asking questions my mother couldn't answer. Her carefully curated reputation, the selfless matriarch, the devoted woman, started to unravel, not because I exposed her, but because she couldn't hide behind me anymore. The silence I once carried for her had turned into a spotlight she couldn't control. I stopped attending family gatherings. No explanations, no apologies. My absence was louder than any speech I could give. Without me, there was no one left to mediate, no one to absorb the tension. Their conversations fractured, their unity dissolved. I watched from a distance as the cracks widened, not out of satisfaction, but out of realization. Sometimes justice doesn't require fire. It only needs withdrawal. People began reaching out to me privately. Cousins, distant relatives, even neighbors. They'd seen what I'd endured for years, but never had the courage to say anything. "We always wondered why you were treated differently," one message read. Now it all makes sense. The truth didn't need my defense anymore. It had already begun to defend itself through others. My sister tried to rewrite the story first. She posted cryptic messages online about betrayal and family turning against you. But the irony was too transparent. Everyone who had seen my art, heard my story, or simply observed our family dynamics knew the truth. The empire of manipulation my mother built couldn't survive without control, and control fades fast when the silence breaks. The financial unraveling came next. My mother's charity board, the one she used to showcase her supposed generosity, began questioning discrepancies in donations. My father's business partners grew uneasy with rumors circulating about the family's internal scandals. I hadn't said a word, yet their empire was collapsing under the weight of its own hypocrisy. The truth has gravity. It doesn't need to be thrown. It just needs to be released. I found myself standing in the wreckage of what once felt untouchable. The people who had spent decades making me small were now shrinking under the very truth they created. And the strangest thing was, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt liberated. This wasn't about payback. It was about finally breathing air that wasn't filtered through guilt and obligation. When I looked at the empty photo frames in their house during one final visit, the ones that used to display a perfect family, I saw it differently. They weren't just missing pictures of me anymore. They were missing the illusion that they were ever whole. Without someone to bear the blame, the facade had nothing left to cling to. Friends asked if I felt sorry for them. I didn't. Not because I wanted them to suffer, but because I finally understood the cost of pretending. They built their empire on image, not integrity, and image always fades when truth takes its place. I didn't destroy them. They destroyed themselves when they made erasing me their mission. Justice wasn't fire and fury. It was standing in the ruins of their lies, knowing I had survived every attempt to silence me. It was realizing that the empire they built was never mine to tear down. It was theirs to lose. And all it took was me refusing to carry the weight of their Tory any longer. I built a new kind of family. Not the kind that shares a last name or pretends at holiday dinners, but the kind that shows up with truth in their eyes and warmth in their hands. It didn't happen all at once. It started slowly. One genuine conversation, one shared moment of understanding, one person who looked at me and didn't see the version of me my mother invented. These weren't people who needed me to shrink to fit their comfort. They were people who made room for my full voice, no matter how loud or imperfect it was. The first person who felt like home was Marcus. He didn't see me as the forgotten daughter or the girl with family drama. He saw the artist buried beneath the ashes. When he stood in front of my first complete series, trembling, uncertain, afraid of what it revealed, he didn't offer polite praise. He said, "This is rage turned into resurrection." No one had ever described my work, or me, with such clarity. His belief in my talent became the foundation for everything that followed. Then there was Rebecca, fierce and unflinching, who taught me that truth can be both art and activism. She refused to let me hide behind humility. "You've spent your life apologizing for your brilliance," she told me once. "Stop saying sorry for surviving." Her words struck deeper than any insult my mother ever hurled because they named what I had been doing, dimming my own light so others wouldn't feel exposed in their shadows. Grandma Rose became the quiet heart of it all. Her love didn't demand performance. It simply existed, steady, grounding, real. She never asked me to prove myself or justify my choices. She just listened. Sometimes, we sat for hours in her garden without saying a word, and somehow, that silence healed more than years of forced politeness ever could. She was the bridge between what I lost and what I was learning to build. Soon, my circle began to grow. Other artists found their way to my studio, people like Sarah, who painted through her anxiety, and Luis, who sculpted grief into beauty. We weren't perfect. We were messy and loud and honest. But in our shared imperfections, we found belonging. There was no hierarchy, no competition, only creation. For the first time, I wasn't a background character in someone else's story. I was a central figure in a community that valued truth over image. Our dinners replaced the sterile family gatherings I grew up with. Instead of judgment, there was laughter. Instead of small talk, there was depth. We argued about art, cried over shared losses, celebrated small victories like they were revolutions. Every meal felt like rewriting a memory, reclaiming the meaning of family, one conversation at a time. In their presence, I finally understood what connection could look like without strings attached. My studio became our sanctuary. The walls, once echoing with loneliness, now carried the hum of creativity and companionship. We filled the space with color, music, and stories, layers of humanity painted over the gray residue my old life left behind. When I looked around at the scattered canvases and half-finished works, I saw more than art. I saw proof that love could be chosen, built, and nurtured from nothing. What surprised me most was how natural it felt to give what I had long been denied. I became a mentor to younger artists, those who, like me, were told their dreams were too impractical, too emotional, too unrealistic. I recognized the fear in their eyes because I had carried it too. So, I made them promises I kept, that their art mattered, that their voices mattered, that they didn't have to earn their worth by being convenient. Each person in this new family mirrored a piece of me that had once been broken. Marcus, the unwavering believer. Rebecca, the fighter. Sarah, the quiet dreamer learning to roar. Luis, the soul who turned sorrow into sculpture. Together, they reminded me that family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build when you decide to stop begging for acceptance and start demanding truth. In this circle, I didn't need to perform or apologize. I didn't need to edit my laughter or measure my words. I could simply exist, unfiltered, unhidden, unapologetically real. For the first time, I wasn't defined by what I lost, but by what I created. A family not rooted in duty or appearance, but in authenticity. People who didn't just fill the silence, but helped me reclaim the voice that was once taken from me. I found my power in color, truth, and defiance. It didn't happen in a single moment, but in fragments, each brushstroke, each confession, each decision to exist louder than my pain. For years I thought strength was silence, that surviving meant staying small enough not to be noticed. But one day, the palette in my hands stopped being an escape and became a weapon. Every shade of blue and gold became an act of rebellion against the invisibility I had been trained to accept. At first, my paintings trembled like I did. The lines were hesitant, the colors too cautious, the canvases full of spaces where fear still lived. But the more I painted, the more the truth demanded to be seen. I started using colors I once avoided, the kind that scream instead of whisper. Crimson for anger, ochre for memory, violet for grief. My art began to carry the parts of me I could never say out loud, each canvas becoming a mirror I could finally bear to look into. The first time I hung one of my pieces in a gallery, I almost didn't show up. I thought no one would see me, just like B, but when I walked in, I saw people standing in front of my work, not just looking but feeling. A woman cried. A man whispered to his partner, "That's what pain looks like when it survives." In that moment, I realized art wasn't just about beauty. It was about truth, raw, inconvenient, and necessary. Truth became my language. I spoke it through color when words failed me. I painted the mother who erased me, not as a villain but as a ghost. Elegant, hollow, fading into the background she tried to push me into. I painted my younger self, small and unseen, sitting in a room of mirrors that reflected everyone but her. Each piece was a confession and a declaration, a way of saying, "I am still here, even if you tried to write me out." Defiance grew quietly inside me, like a seed breaking through concrete. It wasn't loud at first. It was in the small decisions, saying no when silence was expected, showing up when shame told me to hide, creating when despair told me to quit. Each act of resistance built upon the last until one day I realized I didn't need anyone's permission to exist fully. I didn't need validation to be visible. My life itself had become my masterpiece. The gallery shows became larger, but the power wasn't in the applause. It was in the message. Every sold-out exhibition felt like reclaiming another piece of myself they once took. I wasn't chasing fame. I was rewriting history. Each painting was a chapter they couldn't delete, a declaration they couldn't silence. The same people who once ignored me now whispered my name like it carried weight. And maybe, for the first time, it did. But power, I learned, isn't about control. It's about expression. The kind of power I found didn't come from revenge or dominance. It came from authenticity, from standing in the light and saying, "This is who I am," without apology. My art became my manifesto. Every exhibition, every mural, every color that bled across the canvas was a promise to the girl I used to be. You will never be invisible again. I began teaching workshops for women who had been silenced, too. Those who were told they were too emotional, too ambitious, too much. We painted not for perfection, but for freedom. Watching them rediscover their voices through art reminded me why I began this journey at all. We weren't just creating, we were healing, one color at a time. The walls of my studio became a timeline of resurrection. Each painting marked a stage of evolution, from silence to survival, from survival to power. Visitors often said my art glowed. What they didn't realize was that the light they saw came from liberation itself, from finally standing in my truth without fear of who might be watching. I was once the invisible daughter, a ghost in family portraits, a name conveniently forgotten in conversations. Now, I stand before canvases taller than the lies that tried to contain me. I paint not to be seen, but because I am seen. By myself, by the world, by the version of me that refused to disappear. My power lives in color, in truth, in defiance, in every hue that screams that I was here, and I will never fade again.